Welcome to program UGCE Patashala. The paper is Japanese History and Society, the module number 32, titled The Meiji Constitution. When we say Meiji Constitution, it is actually one of the major products of the Meiji Restoration and a program towards westernization of Japan and modernization of Japan. And however, making of Meiji Constitution is also a very interesting story, preceding which Meiji Restoration has happened in the year 1868, and subsequently a series of programs to modernize Japan, to westernize Japan, and also to industrialize Japan, which also took a shape of militarization of Japan, leading to series of wars. But however, since the title is the Meiji Constitution, let us confine our observation to the period preceding Meiji Restoration, what kind of confusion that prevailed in entire Japanese archipelago, that is the collection of several thousands of islands. However, the major four islands are Honshu, Hokkaido, Shikoku, and Kyushu, and there was no political unification. However, the entire country was divided about 250 plus regional provinces led by regional leader in Japanese called Meiji. Japanese nation was divided into about 250 plus regional provinces, which were led by the regional leader by then the name of the position called daimyos, who was totally in charge of his province. Especially his responsibility was to protect the freedom of his place and also maintain continuous payment of tax to the central government, that is to shogun. And while this was going on, at the same time there were certain elements of disturbances in certain provinces led by certain disturbing or recalcitrant elements of daimyos. And it was here some of the major four clans, that's daimyos, specially belonging to such clans like Satsuma, Choshu, Hizen, and Toza, otherwise simply called Sachodohi. These were the four clans which led the restoration of Meiji, that is, restoring the authority of governance to the emperor. That actually happened in the year 1868. Before that, there were certain disturbances that Japan totally remained isolated from rest of the world, except for a small number of Dutch merchants stationed near Nagasaki in a place called Dejima, who were basically engaged in trading activities of importing the requirements of imperial families. However, it was also a period during the isolation, because of the trade relations and trade interest, US was bringing about a lot of pressure on Japan to open up their nation for trade with US. It was in the year 1852, US Commodore Matthew C. Perry arrived in Japan, making formal official request for opening of Japan, giving about a year's time for Japanese leadership to think about and come to a understanding amongst themselves to sign a commercial treaty with the US. This was signed in the following year, but at the same time there were many other European trading countries who also were interested in trading relations with Japan. Thus came about quite a few commercial treaties, and they were to some extent unequal treaties. However, the Meiji Constitution, since is the title of the paper, we have to return to it with a clear statement that Meiji Constitution is a product of Japan's westernization program after Meiji Restoration in the year 1868. In order to advance Japan and in order to industrialize Japan, in order to westernize Japan, in order to give power to the people, consideration to the public opinion and public deliberation of governance and freedom of people, it was necessary to grant certain rights to them and clearly make the statement. And since for program of modernization, Japanese leadership dispatched quite a few delegations overseas. One of the major delegation was led by Ito Hirobumi, who subsequently became the Japanese prime minister. But however, the delegation led by Ito Hirobumi toured Europe in order to study the content, pattern, and relevance of a constitution for Japan. Upon return, a draft constitution was prepared and it was submitted to the emperor and to the peers, that's Genro, Elder Statesman Council, which considered. There was also public demand to quite an extent to grant certain freedom. However, it was quite reluctant government. However, subsequently, draft of the constitution was approved. It was in the year 1889 and it was in the year actually 1890 it took effect. It was only promulgated in the year 1889. Just before 1890, there were few years like 79, 82 and 85 where certain attempts were made. And Meiji Constitution basically granting Japan to have a bicameral legislature, that is upper house and the lower house. Upper house is the House of Peers, where members from the imperial family, then the counts and the viscounts and other nominated members constituted. And the lower house, having about 300 representatives, were elected by a constituency out of 300 million Japanese population. It was barely 5% of Japanese people who have actually participated in voting in the first few houses that were elected. Especially it is actually lower house, which is House of Representatives and the most of the powerful houses. And here only the taxpayers who annually paid 15 yen as tax were allowed to vote. But gradually this was enlarged and it was only in the year 1925 people eligible for contesting for the position of a membership in lower house should have been 30-year-old and a regular payer of tax annually 15 yen. And if only those who have crossed about 30 years are declared eligible to contest the elections. And here now we have a house in place given, actually Meiji Constitution has got 76 articles and these clearly state the position of the emperor, the position of the lower house, the position of the upper house, and electoral freedom to the select population. And it also grants freedom of speech and also freedom, right to express opinion in public. In order to exercise governance in the name of the public opinion, in the name of the people, the emperor, it was only in his name it was exercised. Real power, although it was elected lower house, it was the upper house, that is House of Peers, House of Councillors, which was mostly nominated, and they were exercising the power. Most importantly, the military and the navy were in the hands of the emperor, and in the name of the emperor, the peers virtually exercised the right to give more power to navy and to the military. The military actually engaged in lot of activities overseas and thereby virtually creating a rationale to ask for more budget, double the budget than that of the military. So the Japanese navy gradually became quite powerful. However, it was Meiji Constitution which was for the first time in Asia, first time in Japan, becoming a constitutional monarchy. And first constitution in Asia, first constitution in Japan is the credit of the Meiji Constitution. Meiji Constitution subsequent to promulgation actually was the idea how to fit the nation, how to fit the emperor's position with it. And actually the emperor became quite powerful, and in the name of emperor virtually the whole governance was carried out by the upper house. Having already mentioned that Meiji Constitution is a byproduct of gunboat diplomacy of Commodore Matthew C. Perry. Now let us look at the important few aspects of the constitution as content. Overall, Meiji Constitution had 7 chapters and 76 articles. Some of the important points only can be, because of time constraint, mentioned here. Chapter 1 is actually on the emperor status, who is righteous, just, epitome of sovereignty, and declared actually sacrosanct. To create ideal subjects is also, there are aspects within the constitution containing Confucian ethics and tradition of the 5 key relationships that were upheld as the dictum of the constitution. The emperor actually had the power to reject any bill. He had also a power to regulate the public behavior, also to issue an independent order without even Diet's consent. Here actually amendment, for example, there was a scope for amending any part or any article or any content of the constitution. However, for that the provision was lower house has to receive from the emperor a proposal of the draft for amendment, and it has to deliberate, it has to vote upon. Then via the upper house it has to return to the emperor, meaning the emperor finally receives the deliberated clearance from lower house via upper house. However, he also had the provision to either accept the amendment or even to veto the amendment. This is quite a strange thing, because although there was a provision within the constitution for amending any article or any part of it, never Meiji Constitution was single time even amended, meaning for the whole period from 1889 till about 1947, when new constitution took place, till then Meiji Constitution remained unamended. This is one of the strange or the unique factors of Japanese constitution. Representatives in the upper house, that is actually Genro, who are elder statesmen, they hailed from different samurai factions and different clans, part of the Meiji government as bureaucrats and sometimes even as legislator. The rise of the advisors to the emperor, simultaneous with the upsurge of new economic and social forces, coincided with the influx of Western influence, were anxious to they were actually anxious to assure for themselves as much power as possible. The Meiji Constitution recognized the roles and duties of the subjects, also the responsibility of paying taxes, the inviolation of the right of property, that is right to own property, buy property, sell property, and even freedom of movement of the people were granted in the constitution. People could apply for any new occupation, and also they can decide where to settle down. The government organized resources to draft a budget, maintain financial control, listing down of freedom of speech, writing, public opinion. Japanese parliament also was known as Imperial Diet, the House of Peers, the House of Representatives, and actually it was a copy of, or it was containing healthy elements of Prussian and the German model, because the Ito Hirobumi delegation that toured Europe, they considered actually the British constitution as very parliament oriented, very legislation oriented, and they also thought German constitution is actually giving more power to the authoritarian type of rule. However, American constitution, the delegation considered as ultra liberal, which is not necessary for Japan. Hence, after deliberations, after discussions, after drafting, after editing, after redrafting, Ito Hirobumi group finally decided to have healthy contents both from Prussian and from the German constitution. By modernization, by adopting a constitution in Asia and in Japan for the first time, Japan actually tried to bridge the gap between Asia and Europe, that is between the poor countries of Asia and advanced countries of Europe and United States. And Actually, Japan was recognized by the West as really modern, as to quite an extent almost equal to the European advanced countries. Actually, on February 13th, 1890, New York Times made a full coverage of an article, Why in Asia, and the first time in Japan, an attempt to introduce constitution was made, and now just by adopting a constitution of different elements from Prussian and German constitution, can Japan really be equated with the West just by having certain modernization program to modernize the society, their education, their military, their parliament, and to give force to the functioning of the constitution, whether or not they can be equated. This was a very interesting article in New York Times on February 13th, 1890. If students can access through web New York Times of that date, they can probably find a very interesting piece of writing in this. However, ultimately, the Japanese constitution that helped the Japanese to achieve their dual political goal of recognition from the Western power was to be recognized. Japan's identity during Meiji period is very important. There are quite a few authors like, for example, Leopold Ranke, a Prussian thinker on law of the state. He commented, and Japan actually subscribed to realism. This is what they conclude about. Struggle for power, dominance in Asia from Meiji period on, the way there persisted a very close correlation between the modus operandi of international system and the character of its domestic institutions can all be really helpful in analyzing Meiji constitutions and its impact on the Japanese society and Japanese diplomacy and Japanese foreign relations, in particular about Japan's international relations of the time. Now, just to compare for a while Meiji Constitution of 1889 and post-war peace constitution of 1947 is very interesting. Though there was a provision for amendment in Meiji Constitution, never it was amended. However, its adoption after surrender in World War II post-defeat, Japanese 1947 Constitution was adopted as an amendment to Meiji Constitution itself. This is a very, very interesting part of it. However, it was the emperor who was central and who was most powerful. All powers vested in the emperor in Meiji Constitution. But however, in 1947 Constitution, emperor became simply a symbol of unity of the people. But it is people who are actually having the power to elect the government, and it is post-election that emperor formally nominates the house or declares the house open, nominates the prime minister post-election by the lower house. There have been quite a few changes between the two constitutions. However, the post-war constitution is almost called peace constitution because of importance of Article 9, which is actually renunciation of use of force and war potential, that is respect for human rights and guaranteed by the constitution. Actually, Japan renounces the right to war as an instrument to conclude peace with any other country. This is central to the 1947 constitution, otherwise as mentioned also referred to as peace constitution. Now the present government in the last few years have been trying to divert the thinking both in the public debate and in parliamentary debate in revising Article 9, and in the light of aggressive expansion of China in the maritime water of South China Sea and East China Sea, and perceiving a threat from China and from North Korea, Japanese really want to revise their constitution and give primacy to the security aspects. Anyway, there are certain loopholes in the Meiji constitution. Separation of power between organs of state, factionalism in party politics. Kenneth Pyle, he mentions Japan understands war and peace as domestically generated, that it needs to be internally peaceful. Nuclear allergy and pacifist values need to be considered. 21st century challenges to justify right to collective self-defense and also justification of international security environment. Thus, now if we get back to simply highlight some of the aspects of Meiji Constitution, say emperor was central to exercise all the power vested in him. He was the head of the navy and of the military, but in his name all powers were exercised by the upper house, that was actually consisting of nominated members, Gendo, that's the elder statesman, and imperial family, and counts and viscounts, but the lower house, which actually were elected by the society, taxpayers in particular, and qualification to contest in the election for the lower house was that of one should be a taxpayer plus one has to be 30-year-old at least. So, given some of these, and also giving right to education, and also reforming the society according the freedom of religion, and according right to own property, according right to get educated, according right to accept an occupation, change even the place of one's own residency. These were all some of the important contents of the Meiji Constitution. However, the present Constitution appears to be, according to the Japanese thought, continuation of the earlier Constitution, but drastic differences, especially in Article 9, which was read little before. So, good luck.